Oh, hello everybody. Mr. Hahn back with you guys, and we're going to continue in a moment the book that I've been reading, Where the Red Fern Grows. We're going to start chapter 3 in a minute. But before I get going with the book, I had a couple questions, and that's awesome because people are actually emailing me. So students, if you have any questions about the book, go ahead and email me. That would be awesome. I'd love to respond to them. So I was asked, why is this my favorite book? Actually, this one came from one of the students who was listening, and his mom contacted me and asked. So I had a dog when I was a little boy. I received for my 3rd birthday a golden retriever who I named Snoopy. And when I was 3, Snoopy was kind of my idol, so Snoopy it was. So books about dogs kind of hit home with me. The other thing, for those of you who are watching, reading is so important. In the Hahn household, a lot of you know I have 2 little boys. I have a 4-year-old and I have a 7-year-old. And we have 3 different reading times throughout our day every day. The first one is in the morning. My wife takes our 7-year-old and she teaches him throughout the morning. I take our 4-year-old and I teach him throughout the morning because we kind of try to keep their reading going, so we read then. And then in the evening, right after dinner, we have about a 20-minute Hahn family independent reading time. We all sit in our living room. We each have our own books, and we read silently for 20 minutes. My 4-year-old can't read yet, but he's looking through his picture books, and he's kind of pretending how to read. And then at night, I read to my boys right before bed. Right now, I'm reading them Charlotte's Web. So reading is very important. My wife, actually, is a reading teacher, an English teacher. And so when I made this sign for you guys, we are Martin Road. I hope you guys saw the YouTube video. And we love you all. My wife in her school, she's an 8th grade teacher at Grand Island. They made a slideshow as well, and this was hers. So this is the one that my wife made for her students, so kind of cool. So reading is like a really big part of our family, so the fact that I can share some reading with you guys makes me really happy. All right, chapter 3, here we go. The dog-wanting disease never did leave me altogether. With the new work I was doing, helping Papa, it was just kind of burned itself down and left a big sore on my heart. Every time I'd see a coon track down in our fields or along the riverbanks, the old sore would get all festered up and start hurting again. Just when I'd given up all hope of ever owning a good dog hound, something wonderful happened. The good Lord figured I had hurt enough and it was time to lend a helping hand. It all started one day when I was hoeing corn down in our field close to the river. Across the river, a party of fishermen had been camped for several days. I heard the old Maxwell car as it snorted and chugged its way out of the bottoms. I knew they were leaving. Throwing down my hoe, I ran down to the river and waded across to the place called the Shannon Ford. I hurried to the campground. It was always a pleasure to prowl where fishermen had camped. I usually could find things, a fishing line and a forgotten fishing pole. On one occasion, I found a beautiful knife stuck in the bark of a sycamore tree, forgotten by careless fishermen. But on that day, I found the greatest of all treasures, a sportsman magazine, discarded by the campers. It was a real treasure for a country boy. Because of that magazine, my entire life was changed. I sat down on the old sycamore log and started thumbing through the leaves. On the back pages of the magazine, I came to the for sale section. Dogs for sale. Every kind of dog. I read on and on. They had dogs I'd never heard of, names I couldn't make out. Far down in the right-hand corner, I found an ad that took my breath away. In small letters, it said, "Registered red-bone coonhound pups, $25 each." The advertisement was from a kennel in Kentucky. I read it over and over. By the time I had memorized the ad, I was seeing dogs, hearing dogs, and even feeling them. The magazine was forgotten. I was lost in thought. The brain of an 11-year-old boy can dream some fantastic dreams. How wonderful it would be if I could have 2 of those pups. Every boy in the country but me had a good hound or two. But $50? How could I ever get $50? I knew I couldn't expect help from Mama and Papa. I remembered a passage that my mother had read to me. God helps those who help themselves. I thought of the words. I mulled them over in my mind. I decided I'd ask for help. There on the banks of the Illinois River, in the cool shade of the tall white sycamores, I asked and I prayed, but it came right from the heart. I wished for those 2 little hound pups. When I left the campground of the fishermen, it was late. As I walked along, I could feel the hard bulge of the magazine jammed deep in the pocket of my overalls. The beautiful silence that follows the setting sun had settled over the river bottoms. The coolness of the rich black soil felt good to my bare feet. It was the time of the day when all furried things came to life. A big swamp rabbit hopped out on the trail, sat on its haunches, stared at me, and then scampered away. A mother gray squirrel ran out on the limb of a burk oak tree. She barked a warning to the 4 little furry balls behind her. They melted from sight in the thick green. A silent gray shadow drifted down from top of a tall sycamore. There was a squeal and a beating of wings. I heard the tinkle of a bell in the distance ahead, and it was Daisy, our milk cow. I'd have to start her on the way home. I took the magazine from my pocket, and again I read the ad. Slowly a plan began to form. I'd save the money. I could sell stuff to the fishermen. Crawfish, minnows, fresh vegetables. In berry season, I could sell all the berries I could pick at my grandfather's store. I could trap into winter. The more I planned, the more it became real. There was the way to get those pups. Save my money for something I really wanted. I could almost feel the pups in my hands. I planned a little doghouse where to put it. Collars I could make myself. Then the thought came, what could I name them? I tried name after name, voicing them out loud. None seemed to fit. Well, there'd be plenty of time for names. Right now, there was something more important. $50. A fabulous sum, a fortune, far more money than I had ever seen. Somehow, some way, I was determined to have it. I had 23 cents, a dime I'd earned from running errands for my grandpa, and 13 cents a fisherman had given me for a can of worms. The next morning, I went to the trash pile behind the barn. I was looking for a can. It was going to be my bank. I picked up several, but they didn't seem to be what I wanted. And then I saw it. An old Casey baking powder can. It was perfect, long and slender, with a good tight lid. I took it down to the creek and scrubbed it with sand until it was bright and looking new. I dropped the 23 cents into the can. The coins looked so small lying there on the shiny bottom, but to me, it was a good start. With my finger, I tried to measure how full it would be with $50 in it. Next, I went to the barn and up in the loft. Far back over the hay and underneath the eaves, I hid my can. I had a good start toward making my dreams come true. 23 cents. I had a good bank, safe from rats and safe from the rain and the snow. All through the summer, I worked like a beaver. In the small creek that wormed its way through our fields, I caught crayfish with my bare hands. I trapped minnows in an old screen wire trap I made myself, made with yellow cornbread from my mother's kitchen. These were sold to the fishermen along with fresh vegetables and roasting ears of corn. I tore my way through the blackberry patches till my hands and feet were scratched raw and red from the thorns. I tramped the hills seeking out the huckleberry bushes. My grandfather paid me 10 cents a bucket for my berries. Once Grandpa asked me what I did with the money I earned, I told him I was saving to buy some hunting dogs. I asked him if he would order them for me when I had saved enough, and he said he would. I asked him not to say anything to my father. He promised me he wouldn't. I'm sure Grandpa paid little attention to my plans. That winter, I trapped harder than ever with those 3 little traps I owned. Grandpa sold my hides to fur buyers who came to his store all through the fur season. Prices were cheap. 15 cents for a large possum hide, 25 cents for a good skunk hide. Little by little, the nickels and dimes added up. The old Casey baking powder can grew heavy. I could heft its weight in the palm of my hand. With the straw, I'd measure from the lip of the can to the money. As the months went by, the straws grew shorter and shorter. The next summer, I followed the same routine. Would you like to buy some crayfish or minnows? Maybe like some fresh vegetables or roasting ears. The fishermen were wonderful, as true sportsmen are. They seemed to sense the urgency in my voice and always bought my wares. However, many times I'd find my vegetables left in the abandoned camp. There never was a set price. Anything they offered was good enough for me. A year passed. I was 12. I was over the halfway mark. I had $27.46. My spirits soared. I worked even harder. Another year crawled by. And then, the great day came. The long, hard grind was over. I had it. $50. 50! I cried as I counted it over and over again. As I set the can back in the shadowy eaves of the barn, it seemed to glow with a radiant whiteness I had never seen before. Perhaps it was all imagination. I don't know. Laying back in the soft hay, I folded my hands behind my head, closed my eyes, and let my mind wander back over the 2 long years. I thought of the fishermen, the blackberry patches, the huckleberry hills. I thought of how I asked for help and how I was going to get my 2 hound pups. Early the next morning, with the can jammed deep in the pocket of my overalls, I flew to the store. I trotted along, I whistled and sang. I felt as big as the tallest mountain in the Ozarks. Arriving at my destination, I saw 2 wagons were tied up at the hitching rack. I knew farmers had come to the store, so I waited till they left. As I walked in, I saw my grandfather behind the counter, tugging and pulling. I worked the can out of my pocket and dumped it out in front of him and looked up. Grandpa was dumbfounded. He tried to say something, but it wouldn't come out. He looked at me, then he looked at the pile of money. Finally, in a voice much louder than he ordinarily used, he said, "Where did you get all of this money?" "I told you, Grandpa," I said. "I was saving my money so I could buy 2 hound pups, and I did. You said you would order them for me. I've got the money now, and I want you to order them." Grandpa stared at me over his glasses and then back at the money. "How long have you been saving this for?" he asked. "A long time, Grandpa," I said. "How long?" he asked. I told him 2 years. His mouth flew open. In a loud voice, he said, "2 years?" And I nodded my head. The way Grandpa stared at me made me feel uneasy. I was on pins and needles. Taking eyes from me, he glanced back at the money. He saw the faded yellow piece of paper sticking out from the coins. He worked it out, asking as he did, "What's this?" I told him it was the ad, telling where to order my dogs. He read it, turned it over, glanced at the other side. I saw the astonishment leave his eyes, and the friendly old grandfather look came back, and I felt much better. Dropping the paper back on the money, he turned, picked up his old turkey feather duster, started dusting where there was no dust. He kept glancing at me out of the corner of his eye, and he walked slowly down to the other end of the store, dusting here and there. He put the duster down, came from behind the counter, and walked up to me. Laying a friendly, old, callous hand on my head, he changed the conversation altogether, saying, "Son, you need a haircut." I told him I didn't mind. I didn't like my hair short. Flies and mosquitoes bothered me. He glanced down at my bare feet. "How come your feet are cut and scratched like that?" I told him it was pretty tough picking blackberries black barefoot. He nodded his head. This was too much for my grandfather. He turned and walked away. I saw the glasses come off, the old red handkerchief come out. I heard a good excuse of blowing his nose. He stood out for several seconds with his back toward me. When he turned around, I noticed his eyes were moist. He'd been crying. In a wavering voice, he said, Well, son, it's your money. You worked for it, and you worked hard. You got it honestly? You want some dogs? We're going to get you those dogs." He walked over and picked up the ad again. "Is this 2 years old too?" I nodded. "Well," he said, "the first thing we have to do is write this outfit. There may not even be a place like this in Kentucky anymore. After all, a lot of things can happen in 2 years, you know. Seeing that I was worried, he said, now you go on home. I'll write to these kennels and I'll let you know when I get an answer. If we can't get the dogs there, we can get them someplace else. And I don't think, if I were you, I'd let my pa know anything about this right now. I happen to know he wants to buy that old red mule from Old Man Potter. I told him I wouldn't, and he turned to leave the store. As I reached the door, my grandfather said in a loud voice, "Say, been a long time since you had any candy, isn't it?" I nodded my head. He asked, "How long?" I said, "A long time." "Well," he said, "we'll have to do something about that." He walked over behind the counter. He reached out and got a sack. I noticed it wasn't those nickel sacks. It was the quarter kind. My eyes never left my grandfather's hand. Time after time, it dipped in and out of the candy counter. Peppermint sticks, jawbreakers, horehounds, gumdrops, the sack bulged, and so did my eyes. Handing the sack to me, he said, "Here, first big coon you catch with those dogs, you can pay me back." I told him I would. On my way home, with a jawbreaker in one side of my mouth and a piece of candy in the other, I skipped and hopped, making half an effort to try to whistle and sing, and couldn't, for the candy. I had the finest grandpa in the world, and I was the happiest boy in the world. I wanted to share my happiness with my sisters, but decided not to say anything about ordering the pups. Arriving home, I dumped the sack of candy out on the bed. 6 little hands helped themselves. I was well repaid by the love and adoration I saw in the wide blue eyes of my 3 little sisters. All right, everybody, that's the end of chapter 3. If you guys heard the doorbell ring, that would be my 2 boys playing outside. So I'm going to go see why they're ringing the doorbell. And I will see you guys tomorrow with chapter 4. We're already on page 30. Like I said, long book, so lots to go. See everybody tomorrow. Goodbye, Martin Road.